The Indiana Fever walked into Washington carrying the weight of a season most teams wouldn't have survived. Their 94-65 demolition of the Mystics was more than a win. It was a declaration. It was the proof that resilience, belief, and a locker room mantra can overcome circumstances that should have ended a playoff dream months ago. For a franchise battered by injuries, written off by analysts, and forced to reinvent itself on the fly, this night became the moment where heartbreak transformed into triumph. And at the center of it all stood Aaliyah Boston, calm, steady, and carrying herself like the anchor Indiana needed when their superstar Caitlin Clark and 4 other core players were ripped away by injury. Nobody expected this road. When Clark went down just 13 games into the season with a torn groin, it wasn't just a roster blow, it felt like a death sentence. She had been averaging over 16 points and setting the tone for the Fever's new era, energizing Gainbridge Fieldhouse and putting Indiana back in the national spotlight. Without her, the playoff dream looked dead. Add in Sophie Cunningham's knee, Chloe Beebe's knee, Arie McDonald's foot, and Sydney Colson's season, and the Fever's rotation wasn't just thin, it was shredded. At one point, 18 different players suited up in a Fever jersey. A roster that once looked stable now resembled a moving train that anyone with a pulse was trying to leap onto. Most teams collapse under that weight. Instead, Indiana found a way to grow roots. Head coach Stephanie White never sugarcoated the adversity, but she never let her group see themselves as victims either. She simplified, she streamlined, she reminded them of who they were, and the players bought in. They leaned into the mantra that began as necessity but became identity. Next woman up. That's why when the Fever walked into Washington needing a win to lock up a postseason berth, they didn't look beaten down. They looked galvanized. The game itself told 2 stories. The first half was competitive, tight, and tense. Washington came out firing, testing whether this short-handed Fever squad could keep pace. The Mystics forced Indiana into tough shots, traded buckets, and even carried stretches of momentum. For a moment, it looked like the injuries and fatigue might finally catch up. But then the third quarter came, and with it the storm. Indiana's defense tightened like a vice. Passing lanes closed, shots were contested, and Washington was suffocated into just 9 points in the entire frame. 9. That wasn't just defense, it was domination. And from there, Indiana never looked back. Stretching the lead past 20, past 25. Eventually ballooning to 33, Natasha Howard led the charge with 17 punishing points, asserting herself in the paint whenever the Mystics tried to hold ground. Aliyah Boston, calm and surgical, delivered yet another double-double, her 17th of the season, breaking the franchise record, finishing with 12 points, 11 rebounds, and 5 assists while leading the team in plus-minus at plus 29. Aerial Powers turned the bench into a spark plug, dropping 15 points with 6 rebounds and 4 assists, refusing to let the energy dip. Shea Petty hit 3 triples without missing. Lexi Hull dove for every loose ball and turned defense into offense. And Kelsey Mitchell, despite an off-shooting night, still chipped in double figures to steady the backcourt. By the final buzzer, 5 Fever players had scored in double figures, a balance that screamed identity over reliance. But the stats only tell part of it. What mattered more was the locker room after. The celebration wasn't just about one night, it was about everything that had led to it. From Clark's groin tear to Cunningham's rehab, from the revolving door of hardship signings to the constant whispers that this season was lost before it began. And in the middle of it all was Boston, smiling, joking about TikToks, then quickly grounding the team with the reminder that the job wasn't finished. "Never doubt yourself and what you're capable of," she told her teammates. It wasn't just a quote. It was a living mantra that had carried them through the season. Boston has always been known for her poise, but what she's doing now is different. She isn't just producing 41 career double-doubles in 2 years, anchoring both ends of the floor. She's embodying the culture. Without Clark, she became the pulse, the one who steadied the paint, moved the ball, and reminded her team they belonged. And as the Fever clinched back-to-back playoff appearances for the first time since 2015 and 2016, it was her words that fans echoed online, her example that teammates followed, and her leadership that turned survival into defiance. The bigger picture makes this even more remarkable. Indiana lost 5 core players and still secured a winning record. They've proven they can compete with playoff teams like Atlanta, Las Vegas, and Phoenix, the very opponents they'll likely face in the first round. And for the first time in nearly a decade, Gainbridge Fieldhouse will host postseason basketball again. That matters. Not just because of the wins, but because of what it means for the Fever's future. Caitlin Clark will return next season, joining a locker room that has already forged playoff DNA without her. Cunningham, McDonald, Beebe, and Coulson will come back to a culture hardened by adversity. What looked like disaster months ago has become a foundation. When Aaliyah Boston said they never doubted themselves, it didn't sound like a throwaway line. It sounded like the truth. They had been written off, doubted, and picked apart. But on the road in Washington, they delivered a 29-point demolition that turned doubt into fuel. For once, this wasn't about surviving until Clark returned. It was about thriving because Boston, Howard, Powers, Mitchell, Hull, and Petty had already proven they could. This is no longer the same Indiana fever that began the season. This is a team forged by injury, tempered by doubt, and defined by resilience. This is a team that doesn't just talk about next woman up, they live it. And as they march into the postseason, they do so with a voice, a heartbeat, and a foundation stronger than anyone thought possible. The question now isn't whether they belong. The question is what happens when they're whole again. Because if Indiana can demolish Washington, clinch a playoff berth, and shatter expectations with half a roster, then the rest of the league should be terrified of what they'll look like at full strength. This season tested everything about the Fever. It stripped them down, forced them to adapt, and left them with nothing but grit and belief. And in the end, that was enough. And to clinch the postseason, enough to give Indiana fans their first home playoff game since 2016, and enough to announce that this franchise's future isn't built on one star. It's built on a culture of resilience that no injury list could erase. If you're fired up for the playoffs, comment Fever Playoffs below, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a moment. The postseason is here, the Fever are in, and the league just got its warning shot.